Watch right now on the Front News Project. Putin will strike with the Hazel again. Which regions of Ukraine are in the highest risk zone? The Russian army dropped a half-ton bomb on the Belgorod region. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are striking the enemy near Kursk. And also, footage of the battles for the Kharkiv region. Putin's army is retreating from Berlyn. Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch it, right now. It's the fourth year of the full-scale war, a war that Vladimir Putin and his gang unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces and the entire Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom continues. Greetings, this is Front News. Vladimir Timoshenko here with you. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war uncovered by our journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then let's get started. And we're kicking things off right away with exclusive material. A fiery greeting to the occupiers from the armed forces of Ukraine. Russians are complaining about a strike on a military deployment point in Kursk region. And what's more, the aggressor has lost a Tor M2 air defense system on the front lines, which just for a moment costs around $25 million. Meanwhile, it seems the Kremlin's thugs are using a hit your own, so others are afraid tactic. Just think about it. A Russian plane dropped a half-ton bomb on the Belgorod region. By the way, the shell had less than 60 kilometers left to reach Ukraine. All the details are in our report.
Another enemy deployment site has been eliminated. The Russians complained about a missile strike in the Kursk region. Preliminary reports indicate that the deployment site of the 40th Marine Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation was hit.
A strike was carried out on the permanent deployment site, specifically the command and control post of the Russian army using American weaponry, namely HIMARS. According to objective monitoring data, the command and control post was completely destroyed. Moreover, there is information from the Russian side itself that allows this target to be identified as an exclusively military facility. That is, both the evacuation of the wounded and, accordingly, the deceased servicemen of the Russian Federation have been recorded.
At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to destroy Russian army personnel and military equipment at the front. National Guardsmen burned a Russian Tor M2 air defense system worth about $25 million. Drones dropped explosives on enemy equipment several times. After that, the missile system caught fire, and the Russian occupiers began to flee. What happened to the crew of the system is unknown, but one thing is known: the Russian occupation forces operate by the principle of strike your own so that others are afraid. The Russian army once again dropped a half-ton bomb on the Belgorod region. The shell still had more than 60 kilometers to fly before reaching Ukraine.
Yes, this is not the first time. According to reports from Russian media themselves, at least 70 accidental releases of aerial bombs have been recorded. 62 FABs and 7 aerial bombs with a guided planning and correction module. It should be noted that this number of munitions was dropped by Russian aircraft specifically on the territory of the Russian Federation.
And while the aggressor's army is striking its own territory, the Russian dictator himself is trying to undermine cooperation and unity between the Ukrainian side and Europe and America. He also continues to insist on achieving his goals, among which is the complete capitulation of Ukraine. This is evidenced by calls to start negotiations based on the interrupted discussions and developments in Istanbul at the end of March 2022, according to analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War.
As of May 2025, not even the intermediate stage of the so-called special military operation has been completed, namely the capture of the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, not to mention the strategic objectives such as denazification, demilitarization, and other Russian nonsense. That is why Putin is trying to use so-called peace-loving rhetoric to promote exclusively the Russian vision of ending the war in Ukraine at the expense of territorial concessions from our country and the effective disarmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Let us recall that Putin refused to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. It is likely that he is betting on a summer offensive, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation.
It should be noted that, firstly, the Russian army's offensive has not stopped. Ukraine's territorial losses for the month of April amount to about 175 square kilometers. Yes, that is 6 times less than in November of last year. But nevertheless, the Russian army has intensified the nature of combat operations along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front.
And in addition, Russia has created a secret unit that specializes in sabotage, cyber attacks, and assassinations across Europe. According to Western intelligence agencies, this is a shadow organization called the Department of Special Tasks.
And now it's time to analyze the situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. In the Pokrovsk direction, since the beginning of this day, the enemy has attacked in the areas of the populated areas of Novopoltavka, Mirolyubovka, Luch, Lisovka, Mirnograd, Udaknoye, Novosergievka, Novoalexandrovka, Kotlyarovka, Troitskoye, Andreyevka, Staraya Nikolaevka, Malinovka, Elizavetovka, and in the directions of Popovy Yar, Novonikolaevka, Muravka, Alexeyevka, and Zarya. At the same time, our defenders have repelled 50 enemy assault actions. Pokrovsk, Poltavka, Ilinovka, and Sukhoi Yar were subjected to airstrikes in this sector. And one more thing. Cornered, Putin is once again starting to rattle his Oreshnik. To be more specific and factual, over the Russian military training ground Kapustin Yar in the Astrakhan region, from which Russia previously launched its Oreshnik missile at Ukraine, the occupiers have closed the airspace. What could this indicate or warn us about? Watch further. Let's analyze everything and draw the right conclusions.
The Russian Federation is once again trying to intimidate Ukraine.
I can just see it now, how immediately, several billion people will say, how scary,
In Russia, they've once again pulled out their imaginary joker and started waving it around. We're talking about Putin's much vaunted Oreshnik. The Russians have once again decided to try to frighten us with a strike using this weapon. Of course, this isn't being done directly. Putin and his circle haven't said that a strike on Ukrainian territory is being prepared. However, such a possibility does exist. It's all because of the closure of the airspace over the Kapustin Yar testing range. That's exactly where the Oreshnik was previously launched toward Dnipro. And at that time, there was a similar flight ban. This time, the Russians announced the closure of the airspace on May 12th and 13th from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon local time.
Let's start with the fact that even using the Oreshnik against Dnipro was ineffective. In other words, we're talking about the fact that basically this is Putin's expensive toy, which he found as a substitute for, nuclear weapons, because he didn't dare to use nuclear weapons. So he decided to use some other kind of weapon that would create a wow effect. And in reality, that's what we saw in the video footage from Dnipro. It's impressive. But again, if we talk about the combat use of this type of weapon, it's ineffective.
Putin himself knows this too. That's why Oreshnik wasn't mentioned for quite a long time. Even the propagandists didn't really threaten to blow anyone up with this missile.
A large number of Russian propagandists hardly cover the topic of Oreshnik at all because they understand that it's some kind of non-existent myth. And most likely this is simply the only ballistic missile that the Russian Federation has, which is effective, which has demonstrated its effective use. That's the Yars. It's an old Soviet missile that has been modernized, and most likely Oreshnik is also just a modernized Yas. Therefore, it's likely that, once again, we have to say that at such distances, it is ineffective. In other words, it does not fulfill its combat mission. It cannot carry a warhead that would cause, significant destruction.
But if we talk specifically about the situation with the airspace, the Russians are definitely up to something. The closure will extend from the ground up to unlimited altitude. This is a standard measure during ballistic missile tests. Whether this is about Oreshnik or something else remains an open question.
Russia is fighting according to doctrine, according to Gerasimov's doctrine. That is, it's not just about conducting military operations, but also about psychological pressure, strikes on the civilian population, and creating various other information waves that would cause panic among the population. Therefore, the closure of the airspace over Kapustin Yar can be seen as an attempt once again to launch Russian propaganda using Oreshnik.
But we should not underestimate Russia in its pursuit of terrorism.
In principle, from an engineering standpoint, we're talking about a weapon that is not very effective, but from the perspective of psychological pressure and, let's say, the madness of the Russian Federation, we're saying that in principle Russia could use it. But I am more than sure that in this case, another mine on the launch of this Oreshnik will be unsuccessful, and Russia will lose not only Plesetsk, but also Kapustin Yar.
If the Russian Federation still decides to launch the Oreshnik, we will find out about it soon enough. After all, we should not forget that Russia is required to notify the United States about the launch of such a missile. Washington, in turn, must notify Ukraine. As for the missile itself, in any case, it is nothing more than intimidation. The Russian Federation launches attack drones, cruise and ballistic missiles, glide bombs, and so on over Ukrainian territory every day. And the response to the Oreshnik should be the same as to any other means of attack. Do you hear the air raid siren? Go to shelter.
Now we will move to the Orikhiv and Pridniprovsk directions of the front. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill and maim here as well. In the Orikhiv direction, the enemy carried out 6 offensive actions in the areas of Mala Tokmachka, Mali Shcherbaki, Artoma and towards Pavlivka. Ukrainian units repelled all attacks. The enemy also carried out airstrikes on Pavlivka and Novoyakovlivka. In the Pridniprovsk direction, the enemy attacked our defenders' positions 4 times. They did not achieve any success. At the same time, the aggressor launched an airstrike on Kazatske. And now, a few words about Putin's fake 3-day ceasefire. In the Zaporizhzhia region, in the same Orikhiv direction, the occupiers began storming Ukrainian positions from the very morning of the first day, but did not succeed. Ukrainian soldiers were already prepared for such a provocation. Unable to achieve success on the battlefield, the enemy is destroying the city of Orikhiv itself, dropping more and more aerial bombs, and further demolishing the already devastated infrastructure. But even under such conditions, people still live in the city. The following report from the Orikhiv direction is by TSN journalist Ruslan Yarmolyuk. Fate capability. Well, all the gas charges.
These are exactly the gas charges that, when triggered, release gas and produce smoke, just like on stage.
A gray-haired 48-year-old paramedic shows what the occupiers are currently dropping on the heads of our defenders. These are chemical grenades produced in 2024.
It paralyzes. It paralyzes your breathing, everything stings, your eyes water. Even if you touch it with your hands. That is, even if the room has already been ventilated, it still remains on things. And then, if you rub your face or eyes with your hands, it starts to burn badly. Your eyes start to water, and it just blocks your breathing.
This is what the morning of the first day of the ceasefire looked like. The enemy is launching an assault to gain a foothold somewhere near our positions.
That's how they took advantage of the first ceasefire. They sent in their groups, checked things out, assessed the situation, and then, as soon as the ceasefire ended, they immediately went in. But the second time, that trick didn't work for them.
Took off my uniform, washed up, and had something to eat. Lucky, starting from scratch. There are a huge number of enemy drones and assault troops there. Artillery fire in grid patterns and a lottery. That's what going in and out of positions is like.
My entry took a whole day, because they started shelling after yet another assault. They have their preventive measures and things like that. But nothing worked out for them, so I had to stay longer. But the guys managed. Well done. But actually, getting in is not even the hardest part. But delivering supplies, we carry everything with our own hands.
Then this is what the end of an enemy assault looks like. The enemy is eliminated in the basements of Robotyne, and they also gather in the groves around.
Their assaults never stop at all. They're constantly conducting reconnaissance by combat. Small groups of 2, 3, 4, or 5 people go in, targeting specific spots. That depends on the situation and the position. And they're trying to pinpoint our positions. They move in groups of 2 or 3 people. Accordingly, we open fire. As a result, we reveal our positions. And then life at the position gets a lot more interesting. because they start leveling it to the ground.
Ihor with the call sign Grisha is from Ternopil. He worked abroad in Britain and Poland. He quit his job and returned to Ukraine. He went from being an assault trooper to becoming an officer.
I don't even know. At the start of the full-scale invasion, I was heading in with a clear goal: to tear up the paving stones on Red Square, register as a sole proprietor, and sell them. But now the situation is changing a bit. I don't know. I'll act according to the situation. Well, I won't be filming weddings with a drone, because that's not my profession. Infantry is a slightly different field. Honestly, I haven't really thought about it yet. For now, the task is to finish what we've started. We need to win.
In addition to infantry assaults, there have also been strikes with Kabis. 500-kilogram aerial bombs are destroying the fields and the city of Oric.
Not a single house in Oric has been left intact. Entire streets have been destroyed. The occupiers have intensified their attacks on the city, both artillery and airstrikes. All around, there are fragments from artillery shells lying everywhere. The city is under constant fire from both artillery and drones. That's why it's dangerous for local residents to stay outside in Oric for long.
The city's streets are overgrown with greenery, with ruins sinking into them. Only dogs and cats are seen on the streets. Halina is 77. Here in the city, she is alone. Children in Zaporozhye. She doesn't want to leave because she has a garden and animals that her neighbors abandoned and that need to be fed.
When it boomed, when the shelling started, I stayed at my daughter's for 3 weeks. These are other people's dogs, other people's cats. They need to be fed. So I came back and now I tend Olga's garden and my own, even though my leg hurts.
The residents of Oric live without electricity, gas or water. They survive on humanitarian aid and what they can grow from the land. Whatever they harvest, they eat. Valerie drives around the streets to fill up the tanks with a vital liquid, plain water. Here, it's worth its weight in gold.
We make sure to deliver it here at least once a week. But now water consumption has increased, and sometimes we have to deliver to the same spot twice a week. Sometimes it's a cube, sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 200. The least of all is 200.
The apartment buildings lose a floor, sometimes even 2 every time. Russian aviation is tearing them apart during this 3-day false truce. Civilians are still alive because out there beyond the city, the sky above their heads is protected by those who haven't given up and have been defending the Oric region with weapons in hand since 2022.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Now let's analyze the current situation on the Kharkiv and Kupansk fronts. The enemy is becoming more aggressive here as well. On the Kharkiv front, since the beginning of the day, the enemy has carried out offensive actions 5 times in the areas of Vovchansk and Krasnopershe. The enemy launched an airstrike on the Dvorishna area. On the Kupiansk front, the aggressor attacked in the directions of Pishchane, Lushkivka, and Novosinove. Ukrainian defenders stopped 5 enemy attempts to advance. In fact, even back on May 8th, when Putin so pompously announced that there would be no shelling for 3 days, Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine with Shaheds, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. They struck energy facilities and once again targeted civilians, schools, stadiums, and residential buildings. At the same time, our defenders managed to regain control over part of the previously occupied territories. VSN Nedely correspondent Alexander Zahorodny visited the Kartia Brigade and found out how Ukrainians managed to liberate Berlyn. That is the symbolic name the Russians gave to a strategically important area in the Kharkiv region, for which fierce battles raged for a full 6 months. All the details. Let's watch.
Glory to the heroes.
Deep underground at the command post, the commander of the Kartia Brigade gathers the best warriors. A solemn moment. For the first time, the fighters are being awarded berets as a reward. Now, like the paratroopers and Marines, they have the right to wear them in everyday life. The brigade commander personally wets each beret and puts it on his subordinate. After it dries, it will forever retain this initial shape.
Ready to defend. Ready to defend. We are starting a new and special tradition of awarding the beret. Its official color is national blue.
The charter is strength and will.
The soldiers received these berets for an offensive operation that lasted almost half a year. The village of Lipsy Kharkiv direction. It was here that Ukrainian fighters managed to push back superior enemy forces and liberate the heights, and 200 hectares of forest. They completely drove the enemy out of here.
The goal was to push the enemy away from certain heights. from which in 2022, using artillery and MLRS, they delivered devastating strikes on the city of Kharkiv. Kartia was not working alone. Kartia worked together with the main units, the Intelligence Directorate, and the units of the 92nd Brigade.
The difficulty of the operation was that they had to advance on enemy positions where both the soldiers and the artillery were far superior. The coordination of the entire offensive was the responsibility of this young battalion commander with the call sign Frenchman.
It was necessary to synchronize 3 battalions at the same time. And the actions were very complex. It wasn't just infantry, but also the use of armored vehicles with landing troops and fire support. There were only a few logistical routes we could use to get in. In reality, this was a very, very difficult operation for us.
After the unexpected offensive, the Russians began gathering additional forces to try to regain what they had lost. The most troublesome reinforcement for the enemy turned out to be a very powerful FPV drone unit operating on fiber optics. But our forces held their ground. Franz is confident. Kharkiv is now much safer.
Because of the elevations in the settlement of Liptsi, they can deploy tube artillery and MLR systems from here, which will be able to reach Saltivka, just like last time. In other words, if hypothetically the enemy had taken these heights, Kharkiv would once again be under threat of artillery strikes.
So it's not just about the forests. The point is, they need to be driven out of these heights.
Yes, they were really holding on to these heights.
Now the fighters of Kartia and their neighbors from the 92nd Brigade need to deal with the main problem, fiber optic drones. A new enemy drone unit has brought with it to the Lipsi area a new and insidious tactic, a drone ambush. In the 92nd Brigade, they believe this is a serious problem because the enemy drone quietly waits for its target.
These FPVs are on standby. They wait, not using up their battery, just waiting by the roadside. And when a potential pickup or armored vehicle passes by, they take off and catch up. But for now, this is still a big problem. But we are fighting it as well.
A drone on fiber optics is immune to any electronic warfare. It hides in the grass by the road or on the roof of a nearby house from where everything is visible.
About those drones?
Speaking of those drones, if we go back to them, how can we fight against them?
The simplest way is with a pump-action shotgun. If anyone has one, please help us. Help our armed forces. It's the easiest way to shoot them down. Nothing else works, not electronic warfare, nothing. He could sit down, somewhere behind a tree, or somewhere, maybe on a house, on some ruins. They're small, after all. That is, he sat down and you wouldn't see him.
Now, the greatest danger isn't so much on the front line, but rather on the way there or back. A fighter with the call sign prosecutor is a driver, and it's his profession that has become one of the riskiest in this war. An FPV drone was already chasing him down a country road. A comrade saved him.
An enemy FPV?
An enemy FPV started pursuing, and the soldiers in the pickup opened fire with their rifles and shot down the FPV. Literally about 20 meters away, in the air. There's not much that's pleasant about that experience.
So how do you manage to get through now, when there are drones setting up ambushes?
Well, to be honest, with God's help.
Because of these drone ambushes, the soldiers are forced to stay at the front lines for weeks on end without rotation. While we in the rear are waiting for good weather, at the front they're hoping for heavy rain, strong winds, or fog. That's when it's possible to get through, to evacuate, to rotate people.
There were times when we sat for up to 2 months unable to get out. There was just no way. If we didn't carry out these evacuations, people would simply die. These are the new realities of war. In reality, it's all about drones, drones, drones. And we understand that the future probably belongs to them.
For now, soldiers are being issued pump-action hunting shotguns along with their assault rifles. The Ministry of Defense recently adopted several types of pump-action shotguns as standard issue, because an FPV drone on fiber optics flies slower and is less maneuverable. So there is actually a chance to shoot it down.
And now, let's move to the Kramatorsk and Toretsk directions of the front. Let's be honest, these are also sacred targets for Putin and his gang. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. In the Kramatorsk direction, the enemy launched 3 assaults on our defenders' positions near Vasyukivka, Chasiv Yar, and towards Bila Hora. The defense forces have already repelled one attack by the invaders. The fighting is still ongoing. The Russians also launched 6 assaults on Ukrainian positions. In the Toretsk direction, in the areas of Delivka, Petrovka, and Toretsk. 2 clashes are still unresolved. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces continue to push out the occupiers. The armed forces of Ukraine have advanced near Toretsk and the Kursk region. In turn, Russian forces have begun to use a new type of kamikaze drone more actively, which is essentially similar to the notorious Lancet, but is much more dangerous. In addition, Russia is refining its own naval drone, using the stolen name Katran. But Ukraine also has something to respond with. Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a large-scale increase in the production of interceptor drones, which have already proven their effectiveness in combating enemy UAVs. We have prepared all the details, especially for you.
Ukraine's defense forces continue to hold back the enemy. The armed forces of Ukraine have advanced near Toretsk and in the Kursk region. At the same time, the occupiers have had successes in several directions. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the Russians continued their attacks even after the ceasefire announced by Putin began.
The highest intensity of combat clashes has been recorded in the Pokrovsk and Lyman directions. The occupiers are trying to use the so-called ceasefire to redeploy personnel and improve their tactical positions directly on the front line. According to reports from the Russian side, at the moment, fierce fighting is taking place in the settlement of Tetkino, in the area of Chapaeva and Pogranichная streets. The enemy is actively trying to use fiber optic UAVs and accordingly Army frontline aviation.
And Russia is developing its defense industry. Every year, the aggressor country produces more than 1,400 Iskander missiles and 500 Kh-101 cruise missiles. This is reported by The Economist.
The stockpile of cruise missiles is more than 500 units. And in addition, the occupiers have the capability to produce ballistic weapons. Moreover, it is reported that this amounts to about 30 units per month.
But the occupiers are having problems with the production of armored vehicles. Only 10 to 15% of the 1,500 to 2,000 tanks and 3,000 other armored combat vehicles produced annually are new. The rest are taken from old Soviet stockpiles. Russian forces have also begun to use a new type of kamikaze drone more actively, which serves a similar purpose to the well-known Lancet, but according to experts is more dangerous.
The main feature of this drone is its guidance system with machine vision. The drone is equipped with a powerful camera and a video stream processing module. In addition, according to experts, this drone is equipped with a laser rangefinder. Apparently, this improvement provides additional capabilities for navigation systems based on the terrain. In addition, it should be noted that according to experts, the flight range and accordingly the tactical and technical characteristics have been increased.
Also, Russia has intensified the development of its own maritime drone, Katran, the concept and even the name of which they stole from the Ukrainian one. Theoretically, the occupiers' drone could pose a threat even to Odessa. However, there is one big but here. The fact is that the new system is not equipped with a satellite communication antenna.
So this is quite a serious development. But I want to emphasize once again that unlike the Ukrainian counterparts, it will be especially vulnerable to the operation of Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. Therefore, accordingly, strengthening electronic warfare systems on the Black Sea coast will minimize the use of this Russian defense industry know-how.
But for now, the Russians only know how to steal. The American company AeroVironment has unveiled its new ultra-smart kamikaze drone, the Red Dragon, whose main feature is its autonomy. It can detect and attack targets virtually without operator involvement, and even in the absence of a GPS signal. It is likely that it could also be used in Ukraine.
This drone has already undergone testing in real combat conditions. The theater of operations is not specified, but apparently it refers specifically to the Russian-Ukrainian war. According to statements from the American side, this drone will have a high degree of autonomy and accordingly it uses a visual navigation system and an optical homing head. This significantly improves its tactical and technical characteristics when searching for targets and consequently striking them despite the countermeasures of electronic warfare systems.
Ukraine is also developing its own systems to combat the occupiers and is strengthening its air shield. The president of Ukraine announced a large-scale increase in the production of interceptor drones. which have already proven their effectiveness in fighting enemy UAVs.
That's all for today. But very soon, Front News will bring you new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war. Gathered so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Tymoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.